We're going to start by attaching our picture that we drew on paper onto our sheet of metal. Notice that there is a thin sheet of metal all the way around. That is where we will attach it to our mat board later. Take your masking tape and very carefully tape down all edges of your paper. Be very careful that you do not cut yourself with the metal. If you run your finger across the edge, you're going to cut your finger. Make sure to go around all 4 edges, taping from the front and folding over to the back. I did trim the corners as I went, removing any excess tape that went over the corners. Now that your drawing on your paper is attached to your sheet of metal, we can just simply trace with a ballpoint pen using some pressure to push the metal down into the foam pad underneath. Make sure before you begin that the foam pad is underneath you, otherwise it's not going to push the metal down correctly. It needs a little give underneath. We are using a pen so that way you can see where you have already traced it. The amount of pressure you are using should be just enough to push the metal down slightly. Not enough that you're going to rip the paper or even the metal. This metal is not super thick, it is on the thinner side, so be careful. Once you have traced every part of your drawing and it's pressed into the metal, we are going to carefully remove that paper and tape from the metal. I start by gently peeling up the tape on the back of the metal. Remember, the metal can cut you. Do not run your finger along the edge, and be very gentle when removing that tape, that you don't cut yourself or bend and mess up your piece of metal. Now that you have the paper removed and our design is lightly pressed into our metal, we are going to repress and deepen some of those grooves. That way they stand out more once we put our paint on it. Before you begin, make sure the foam piece is underneath your sheet of metal. Remember, that is going to help deepen those grooves without messing up or breaking your metal. You have your stylus. Your stylus has 2 different ends on it. Basically, they're just 2 different sizes. So just choose which one you want for different areas. Obviously, the smaller will make more details into it. I am using the baby oil to help the stylus glide across the metal a little bit better. I apply the baby oil with a paintbrush. You're using very, very little baby oil because you don't want that to get in the way of the paint later. You need to be careful not to cut yourself and not to push too hard that you break through the metal. You should just be trying to make a dent in the metal to make your picture. Make sure that the foam piece is underneath when you do this, and be careful that your lines are not too close together. If they're too close together, we're not going to see the design because they're going to all mush together. You can take your design all the way to the edge of the metal, but remember, at least a 1/4 inch will be covered with the mat board, so you won't see that 1/4 inch all the way around of your picture. Now the design is pressed into your sheet of metal, we are going to use some black acrylic paint to make that design stand out a little bit better. Make sure that before we actually start painting, if you use the baby oil, that we gently and carefully remove all of the baby oil from it with a paper towel. The baby oil will make paint not stick. I am working with acrylic paint and the paintbrush and really making sure that the paint gets down into the grooves that you pressed into your sheet of metal. What we're going to do is that after we paint this, we're going to let it dry for a few minutes, not too long, and then we're going to take a slightly damp paper towel and wipe off the excess paint from the top of your metal. It is very important that when you are painting, for this to work, that you get all the paint into the grooves. If it's not sticking, wipe it off because the oil's probably there, and finish painting it in the grooves. This process needs to happen pretty quickly. I'm going to probably only paint half of the metal at first, wipe it down, and then do the second half after. After a few moments of the paint sitting in those grooves, I'm taking a damp paper towel and going to lightly wipe across the top of the metal. We're going to see that the paint smears, and that is fine. We kind of want that look. So make sure you're going in the same direction the whole time, or in circular motion, whatever look you want to go for. But don't over wipe. You want the paint to stay inside of those grooves. As you can see, the design shows up a lot better now. Make sure before you start this process that you have a messy mat underneath you so you don't have to clean the table like I did. Once the first half is done and complete and slightly dry, go ahead and move on to the second half of it, repeating the same steps. Apply the paint inside the grooves, let it sit for a few minutes, and then take a damp paper towel and wipe off the excess paint. Once you are finished, if you notice paint missing from a specific area, or you want a little more paint showing on the raised part of your metal, just go ahead and add some more paint back to it and gently wipe it off again. Just repeat this until you get the desired look. After we finished painting over the sheet of metal, I then matted it onto a black mat board so that way all the sharp edges of your metal are covered, and we now have an extension to our picture. I recommend you use a white Prismacolor to extend that picture. Notice how it matches up exactly from where the metal left off. However, if you want to be able to erase, if you think you're going to make some mistakes with your Prismacolor, switch to a pencil. It will still work, it'll just be a little bit more difficult for you to see what you're doing. Your design will continue around the entire mat, extending all the way to the edge. Now it is time to color your extension around your piece of metal. Keep in mind that you have a black background for this part, so you're going to want to use brighter colors so it'll stand out more. You can use the darker colors for shadows, just don't make it the main object. I chose to go with really bright, colorful choices for a bold look. I wanted a high contrast between the black background, the colors, and the sheet of metal on the inside. You want this extension part to create a more realistic look to contrast against the metal texture part. So make sure you are using highlights and shadows to create those effects. Remember to choose your shadow color or your highlight colors to look at your color wheel and find all your analogous colors. Those are going to work best together. As you can see me coloring here, I build up layers. I start by putting down a base coat to cover the black, and then I go in with my lightest highlight color, and then I mark the shadows before I blend it all together. I would go for at least 85 to 90% of your extension part to be colored. I did not color in all of the blue. I wanted some black to stand out so that way the other objects would be more visible. But at least 85 to 90% colored.